Hi, everyone. Welcome to Open Nurses Psychedelic Chat. I'm Andrew Penn, psychiatric nurse practitioner and co-founder of Open Nurses, and it's my pleasure tonight to interview not just one person, but two people involved in psychedelic nursing. Jessica Fitzmaurice is a registered nurse, and she is also the co-director of Decriminalize Nature Northwest Arkansas. She's also a mother of five, an enthusiastic mountain biker, and a lover of the outdoors, where she finds a deep connection in nature. Jessica has also suffered from unresponsive severe depression and anxiety for the last 20 years. And after studying the research on psilocybin and microdosing as a treatment for depression, Jessica tried growing psilocybin mushrooms to microdose as a treatment and was successful in both regards. But her efforts did not go unnoticed, and her grow operation was disclosed to the authorities, which led to an early morning raid in hazmat suits, and the psilocybin that she was growing was confiscated, and she was arrested. She was charged with manufacturing a Schedule I substance and faced up to 30 years in prison. She'll share what happened next in her interview. But since this time when her felony conviction was reduced to a misdemeanor and her nursing license is in the process of being reinstated. During her probation, Jessica completed specialized training in psychedelic therapy and integration through the VITAL program, and she's a passionate advocate for the decriminalization of psychedelics and the right to try these compounds for life-saving transformational experiences. She strongly believes that individuals should not have to face the legal repercussions that she experienced for cultivating, sharing, or using these natural sacred compounds. She's joined tonight by Tarin Hale, who is an attorney at law, has been practicing law in Ohio for over 30 years. Starting out in a small town and navigating his way through many areas of practice, Tarin offered a holistic approach to his practice of law and his clients. In 1999, Tarin received national attention for his defense of a 12-year-old accused of murder based on a false confession. The case was featured on ABC's 2020 news program back in 1999 and was revisited a year later for a 2-hour special titled Gone Before the Storm. And the injustice of that case was a turning point for Tarin, triggering a series of events, sending him into a personal and spiritual crisis. Struggling with severe depression, Tarin was guided to a plant-based spiritual work that he credits with saving his life. Since that time, Tarin has melded his law practice with advocacy for entheogenic plant sacraments and related legal issues. While most of his work has been out of the public view, several recent projects have received some public attention. In 2021, Tarin intervened in Jessica's case, utilizing his extensive contacts in the psychedelic community to quickly recruit 6 experts from across the country to write opinions in support of Jessica. And in 2022 and 23, Tarin also worked behind the scenes in assisting Lieutenant Sarko Gregarian to become the first active duty police officer to receive permission from his department to attend a psychedelic church. Tarin's approach to entheogenic sacred plant work is to focus on the spiritual and religious context, which he believes is the core of the transformational mystical experience. So without any further ado, let me welcome Jessica and Tarin onto the screen. Hello, you guys. Welcome. Thanks for being here with us on Open Nurses Psychedelic Chat. We have some folks watching at home right now live. If you are watching from home and watching this live, feel free to go ahead and put in the chat where you're watching from, and that would be great so we know who's out there. And many other people watch this on the replay on YouTube. So we went over some of your story in the introduction, Jessica, but wow, what a ordeal you went through. So tell us more about how this started. What got you thinking about, you'd struggled with depression for a long time. What led you to mushrooms?
Well, I've been on a lot of different antidepressants, over 20 different antidepressants over probably 20 years. I've been to therapy. I've tried all of that. Nothing really worked for me. So that's how I decided to look into the mushrooms.
Yeah.
Well, I had a friend of mine kind of bring it up after he'd been watching me struggle with depression. and nothing was working. And
Mhm.
he had been microdosing and it was working for him. So he shared that information with me, and that led me to do the research myself.
Mhm.
I looked at some journal articles, and I was reading the studies at Johns Hopkins, and
Mhm.
there was a lot of people having success with it, according to the studies. So I was just in a desperate situation. I
Mhm.
was suicidal, and
Mm.
I just wanted some relief. So I grew mushrooms on my own to have a safe supply.
Very do it yourself.
Yeah.
Because of course you can't just go and buy psilocybin from your local CVS or something, right? You've got to grow it yourself. And so you were microdosing, it sounds like, to treat your depression, and it sounds like this was helpful to you.
Yeah, it was. It was very helpful. I was microdosing off and on for several months, and I just experienced so much relief. Like I felt self love for
Mm.
myself the first time ever. Uh,
Mhm.
I was able to just look outside and recognize that it's a beautiful world that we live in, and there was endless possibilities, and I became it just felt right. It felt natural, and I felt normal, and
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we hear that from a lot of folks who are similarly desperate to find something that works and find something that feels more agreeable to their values. And so, yeah, what you're telling us is not that uncommon. But what happens next sounds like it was a pretty horrific experience. Could you share with us how you ended up running afoul of the law with this situation?
Yeah, one of my ex-husband's family members had found out that I was growing mushrooms, and
Mhm.
so we had just recently been through a divorce, and I think she was really upset with me because I kind of broke up a family,
Mhm.
and she called the CPS on me, and therefore the police were involved,
Okay.
and they showed up at my house one morning after I got off of work from a shift in the NICU, a travel job,
Mhm.
and right as I was going to bed, because I worked the night shift,
Mhm.
they busted my door down because I didn't answer it fast enough.
Oh boy.
They were wearing their yellow haz, hazmat suits, and they had guns, and there was
Mhm.
probably 7 or 9 of them, and they just knocked my door down, and they pointed guns at me, and
Wow.
I just instantly just lost it all right there. I froze up, and
Wow.
yeah.
That sounds terrifying. Uh, yeah. So they came in with hazmat suits. What were they worried they were going to be exposed to?
They were worried that the spores from the mushrooms would intoxicate them.
Oh, okay. Um, hmm. Hope they don't go any walks in the forest.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So that's scary. So your house is broken into, guns drawn. I assume you're arrested at this point. Okay. Taken to jail? What?
I'm taken down to the police station for interviewing, and I was just honest with them. I told them that I was using them to microdose for my depression,
Uh-huh.
and I don't believe they've ever heard of anything like that.
Okay.
So I I ended up in jail, and
Mhm.
luckily my husband, my now husband, who I've known since we were kids,
Mhm.
he bailed me out, and it just everything just it was just a lot of work. It was scary.
Yeah. At what point did you have to report this to the nursing board or your hospital? So you said you were doing NICU shifts at that time. At what point did your work get involved?
Well, I went to work for several months after my arrest,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't tell anybody about it because I was just really, really scared. Scared. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I wanted to be proactive with my nursing license, so I self-reported it to the board of nursing, and I knew they were going to have me in like a drug abuse program, and I just wanted to get that started, just so I wanted to try and keep my license.
So you anticipated that there'd be problems
Yeah.
with your nursing license, yeah? Because every time we renew our licenses, we always have to sign something that says that we don't have a substance use problem and we haven't been arrested and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
so then this proceeds through. So you're out of jail, you're on bail, you're going back to work. At what point, when did you learn about what sort of charges you were facing and what sort of punishment you were potentially looking at?
I knew right away because we called a lawyer the same day that I got out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of explained to me that it was a level 2 felony and I was facing this many years in prison. And
Okay. What if you're okay with sharing, how much time were you looking at potentially?
close 30 years. And I think he's told me that I would end up going to jail for 10 years at the most with if I took a plea deal.
Wow, that's terrifying. And this was around the time, Tarin, that I think you got involved, if I'm remembering the story correctly.
Yes, a bit. I mean, let me fill in a little bit. This is the first time Jessica and I have talked about her story. She just finished probation last April,
Okay.
and she just recently got her approval to get a license for a nursing license in Arkansas.
Okay.
And we've been wanting to, we're not been kind of quiet about the case in private, but we feel that it's really time to really share her story because it does affect a lot of people, I think, and it's also important for people to understand the law.
Yeah.
Jessica had depression and anxiety from high school, 20 years trying every pharmaceutical and unsuccessfully. And in a state, she was in a very depressed and anxious state following her divorce. A friend suggested, "Hey, have you tried this?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's where she got involved with growing it all herself because she felt that was safer than trying to find it on the street. She read the NYU studies, the John Hopkins studies. She read the Jim Fadiman protocol and Paul Stamets protocols, and was trying to do it responsibly. And she did so successfully for her own mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And tragically, it was used against her by an ex-family member.
Yeah.
After she was arrested, she went to the internet phone book and found a lawyer, and she reported to me that this lawyer promised her that he would take it to trial, promised her that she wouldn't serve time in prison, and he proceeded to file continuances throughout the 6-8 months that he had the case, and really not explaining anything of what he ever did in the case. Ultimately, at the final pre-trial, in which the court had already told them no more continuances, he had sent a assistant to represent her and asked for a continuance. And when the judge said no more continuances, that's when she was told that the plea deal was served 10 years in prison on a 15-year sentence, and that was the best they could do.
Wow.
And she went before the court in June, accepted that plea, and was scheduled to come back in July for sentencing and for accepting the plea. I fortunately read about her story in a psychedelic spotlight article that I happened to see. I traveled a lot back then. I came back home. I had hundreds of emails to go through, and this one really caught my eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached out to Jessica, and I could not believe this story. It said that she was going to serve 10 years in prison for microdosing mushrooms.
Mm.
It didn't tell you where it was in Indiana. It didn't tell you, any more identification of it. But luckily the next day, there was a GoFundMe account, and through that I was able to reach out to her.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, I don't think she believed me I was going to do anything, or if I could. She was. It was sad. She was very resigned at that point. This is in July 23, and she was, I believe, it was 23 or 22.
I think it was 22.
It was the COVID years, not all those years all blur together to me.
So she was resigned when I talked to her, and she's resigned to go serve 10 years in prison, and she's going to try to work on her RN degree. And she said, "Well, thank you for calling. I appreciate your support." I said, "No, you don't. Send me everything you've got. Send me all the documents." And that's when I read about the fact that the attorney didn't do anything for her, and it was really sad. And I was able to reach out. We had to make a decision first, though. We had a meeting with him over the telephone, and he said very clearly, you can withdraw your plea, but if you withdraw your plea, I can promise you this: if you're not successful elsewhere, it won't be 10 years. It will be 20 years that you serve.
Oh, wow.
And he said, you've got 24 hours to decide whether or not you want to pull the plea and roll the dice. I tried to find another attorney locally for her and they all refused the case. They said, I'd be wasting your money to try to get a different deal. This is the county where the judge is literally married to the sheriff, one judge for the whole county. And it was very sad. And we had 24 hours, and she asked if I would help her. And I said, I'll do everything I can. I'm not licensed in Indiana, and I did not want to step in there as an outsider trying to tell the judge what to do. It doesn't work well. A lot of my practice was in a small town in a county, and I understand local politics.
Yeah,
so I wasn't sure about that. But the next day, we talked, and she said, "Tarin, I don't think I'm a criminal. If it's 10 years or 20 years, it doesn't really matter to me. It'll ruin my life. I want to fight it." So we fired her lawyer, and we reached out through miracles. We found a lawyer to come in and represent her. And we were successful. I reached out in my community of people. Through my sister, I was able to find Carolyn Dorson, who put me in contact with you. And through you, I reached out, and we got 6 experts from across the country to write letters of support and try to explain microdosing to a judge who'd never heard of it, a prosecutor who's never heard of it. Even her lawyer was from the normal group involving marijuana issues, had never really dealt with psychedelics. And so we're educating everybody along the way. And it was very challenging. And we weren't sure where it would land, but we had a lot of support, and we felt optimistic about that. Jim Fadiman wrote a wonderful letter that, you all did. 6 people, and it really came together well, and we were successful. And finally, it came down, though. The prosecutor, I remember it very distinctly, on a Friday. We fired her lawyer. So her case was scheduled for hearing for sentencing in August. I reached out to her like 2 weeks beforehand. We had to fire her lawyer, find a new lawyer, file a motion to withdraw her plea, file a motion that challenged the constitutionality of some of the issues in a matter of 2 weeks. And it was amazing that we were able to do anything. And then once we did that, that's when we reached out for the experts. But there was a phone call that came in on a Friday from the prosecutor, and he was trying to reach the lawyer that we hired, and the message that was left was that he was upset, but they were going to try to. He was upset about something, and we needed to contact him. And then the lawyer called me back and said, I spoke with the prosecutor, and he's upset. And what he said was, I can't believe that her lawyer did absolutely nothing in this case. We had no idea. Thankfully, there was no record. She never shared any of it. She never sold any of it. She only grew for her own personal use. There was that was, and that's what really kind of helped the case, as well as the expert reports. And finally, after months of negotiating or review, the prosecutor agreed to drop it down to a single charge of possession, a felony possession charge. It was a 90 days house arrest followed by a 1.5 years probation. Thankfully, under Indiana law, and once you complete probation under a felony, you can petition the court to have it reduced to a misdemeanor conviction. And she was successful in having the judge reduce it as well, which is also the reason why we didn't want to buck the system. We were very disappointed, though, at sentencing. Despite the reports that we sent in and the explanation, the judge commented the fact that she was just very upset with the idea of thinking that for herself, she had children, young children that were in ICU. And to think that one of the nurses there would be under the influence of drugs was very upsetting to her. And it was very upsetting to us that she still wasn't, she had not read the report. She really doesn't understand it. But we're thankful with the ultimate result we're thankful for. And it was also very profound that in June, when Jessica agreed to the plea agreement, she had to go to the probation department. She has had almost no contact with her lawyer. Her lawyer is not helping her at all through this process. And Jessica writes this letter. She's given an opportunity with the probation department to explain what happened. And she writes this very compelling letter. And she talks about how the depression and anxiety, how she was desperate she was. Even when I asked her, I said, why did you do it? She said, Tarin, I wanted to die. And I thought maybe before I kill myself, I should try this, as a friend suggested. And that's really what she wrote in the letter. And it was very compelling. And for me was what really stood out. I mean, the story was just shocking. It was just shocking that someone would be facing 10 years in prison for this.
Yeah.
And my wife was very insistent. When I told her, when she read about the story, she just, you've got to do something. I said, I'm trying. She said, no, you got to do something. So that was a lot of support.
Yeah, I remember. I think that's how you and I actually met. Was you reached out to me, asking, what are those called? Amicus briefs. Letters.
Well, no, it was a letter. It was an expert letter and support. It was a precursor to courtroom testimony that we bring you in and testify about to educate the judge. And it was really it was front loaded with the idea that understanding that these prosecutors don't know anything about these cases.
Right.
And so if I have all the experts on my side, which I believe I have all the experts on our side, then it's just a matter of educating the system so that they can catch up with where this really will ultimately land.
Yeah.
And what I was going to say, though, in her letter to the court, she tells her story. And what was really beautiful about it, too, was the fact that she tried it to treat her depression and anxiety. But what she really talks about is finding the oneness, finding the connection to a spiritual process. And that's, that falls within more of my practice, where I believe in the spiritual religious exemption.
Yeah, I want to circle back to that, but before we do that, Jessica, I'm dying to know. I mean, so you're in the situation where you're dealing with people that have a lot of potential power over you that really don't have any idea what they're talking about, and you're looking at, a good chunk of your life that you could lose to prison. I'm just wondering, what was that moment like for you?
Oh, I just thought my whole entire life was coming to an end, and I was planning on how I was going to die in prison, because there's no way I could sit in 10 years in prison. I was ready to just give up and be done with the whole living thing. It was the most traumatic event I've ever had in my life, and I mean, I carry that trauma with me right now today, and it's really hard to talk about, but I think my story needs to be heard so so I can help other people that are in similar, and wanting to treat their depression and anxiety.
Yeah. What do you feel like, you took from this that you would want other people, other nurses, or not just nurses, but anybody who's kind of in a similar position? I mean, what would you want them to know from your experience?
Well, first of all, I would not recommend using or growing your own mushrooms if you live in a state where it's not decriminalized at all.
Mhm.
I would never want anybody to go through what I went through. I mean, I should have went out to Colorado or somewhere where it was decriminalized, and it was my only option, though, honestly. Like, I had no other choice. So,
Yeah, and you've got a job and you've got a family, and you can't just pick up and go to another state at the drop of a hat. So and you were struggling with some really bad depression, that sounds like.
yeah, I hadn't heard of ketamine treatments before I learned about mushrooms, but
Mhm.
so it was after I was arrested and I was going to be on house arrest. I was looking online to see if there was something else that might be helpful for me, and
Mhm.
I was reading about ketamine therapy, and so I called the clinic and I got into the ketamine treatments, and
Mhm.
that was a lifesaver for me. Also,
Mhm.
I felt whole, and it just
Mhm.
beautiful when I was microdosing.
Mhm.
And when I was arrested, all of that was just taken. All of those feelings I'd worked so hard for on my mental health was just
Mhm.
I didn't feel like that anymore. But ketamine, as soon as I had my first ketamine treatment, the suicide ideation just flew away. I
Oh, good.
I had no more suicidal thoughts, and really thankful for that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so good to hear.
How'd
Did
you
you
ketamine then?
Yeah. Since many of the people watching this will be nurses, but other, licensed professionals who have to deal with licensing boards and such, did you have repercussions with your nursing license as a result of this?
Yeah, I had to enroll in the iSnap program in Indiana.
What's that?
It's kind of like a substance abuse education program.
Mhm.
I had to call in every day to see if I needed to take a drug screen. I had to take a drug screen once a month. Um, they were going to take my license was on going to be on probation,
Okay.
and I ended up just moving to Arkansas because it was just too much to stay in Indiana. With
Uh-huh.
I just couldn't bear it. I just felt like I was ousted and I had no community support. I mean, if I went to the grocery store, I would see somebody I knew, and of course, my name was plastered all over the front page of the newspaper, labeling me as this awful, horrible person. And
Mm.
I ended up moving to Arkansas partly because my husband had a job that relocated there, and I just thought it would be a great idea for my mental health to be in the natural state. And so I applied for my nursing license in Arkansas, and they told me as soon as I successfully completed my probation from my arrest that
Mhm.
they would consider issuing me a nursing license.
Mhm.
Well, fast forward, I successfully completed my 18 months of probation and 3 months of house arrest, and I'm just waiting until March 1st when I can. They want me to. Arkansas wants me to be in this drug abuse assistance program, also like Indiana wanted me to do. So I start that on March 1st, and it's the same concept. I'll call in every day, see if it's my turn to take a drug screen. And I'll have to do that for a year, and then I can apply to get a compact license, and hopefully be ready to roll.
Wow, but you're still in kind of a holding pattern to get licensed.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Because so there's the legal side of things, but then there's also the licensing repercussions of something like this and your ability to earn a living. Because obviously, right now you can't work as an RN.
right. I'm actually a waitress right now, and
Wow.
I wait tables, but I love it. I meet a lot of neat people. I get to share my story with strangers.
I was a med surg nurse for a while. I remember some patients that I think they thought I was their waiter. So there's some crossover between those skill sets.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Mountain Dew and pain meds on the med surg floor.
Wow. I mean, you really what you've been through, the amount of resilience that it must take to get through something like this. And, and not only to have to sort of face unjust drug laws, but also just ignorance, people putting you in the same category as somebody who was, I don't know if you ever saw that show Nurse Jackie, who was stealing opiates from the med room, like you're lumped in the same group,
Yeah.
even though it's really apples and oranges, but, and I don't even think, ironically, those drug tests pick up on psilocybin.
Well, they don't, and it is very ironic. And when I had to transfer my probation from Indiana to Arkansas.
Yeah.
And my probation officer here he was such a blessing to me. I had no resources in Indiana. This probation officer, he was curious about my story.
Okay.
And he just set me up with the right resources, and he found me a great therapist. And, I give him a lot of credit too for helping me get through this.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had some good allies along the way.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious to pivot to what you're doing next and to talk about, kind of what some of the implications of this are. We sort of hinted at that a little bit, the idea of like right to try laws and decriminalization. And I know you're involved with Decrim Nature in Arkansas there. Where has this, this is obviously a life-changing event, and I'm curious in terms of how it's changed your thinking, what you're interested in and what you're wanting to advocate for. If you could talk a little bit about that. And Tarin, I'd also love to get your sort of legal take on the right to try issue, because I know that's often brought up with regards to psychedelics in various jurisdictions. So kind of a two-parter there. But what are you working on now?
Well, right now, I went to MAPS in 2023, and
that's where we met in person.
Yeah. And it was just such an awesome experience. And I really wasn't familiar with the psychedelic community at all. I didn't know it existed, actually. And so I went to MAPS and met all these cool people and came home, and I was like, well, hey, what if we can decrim nature where we live, and we can grow mushrooms and microdose? And so I got a hold of Larry Norris, who runs the National Decrim organization, and he's just wonderful too. He guided us through getting the group set up, and I've got a lot of people that are supportive of it around here in Arkansas. And so we created the group, and right now we're doing monthly education nights in Bentonville and in Fayetteville, just kind of educating the people around here. A lot of them are really, they know about psychedelics and psychedelic therapy and the healing. It's so different here. It's just such a different atmosphere.
In what way?
I feel like people here in Northwest Arkansas are more open to new ideas and new concepts, and they said it's a red state, but it just does not seem like a red state compared to living in Indiana.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes those of us who live on the coast, the coast of this country, sort of look in the middle of the country, and it's like, what happens there? It's really nice to hear that not only is there some nuance, but there's some open minds as well. That you're encountering there. So you're working with the decrim movement. Is there any kind of legislation that's being proposed or within Arkansas to actually put this into law?
Not that I know of at this point, but we've got a resolution written up, and we're preparing to have conversations with the mayor, the county sheriffs, and the city council members.
Uh-huh.
And I'm really looking forward to it because I think we actually have a chance.
Yeah.
People want to learn here. They're very curious and interested.
Yeah. Well, and when they meet somebody like you, who's a real person, a nurse, a mom, you're not some scary caricature that people think of when they think of drugs.
Right. I just didn't realize how my story affected other people, and I've noticed that it has, and the power of story sharing is just awesome. And
it is really powerful
right here. So.
Well, that's why we wanted you on here, because get you. I know these things are delicate when you're navigating through a legal system. You don't want to. You have to be careful not to appear that you're trying to manipulate an outcome or something like that. So sometimes you can't talk about things, and I think that was the situation for a while, understandably. But now that you're through this process, I'm glad that you can be more forthcoming about it, because I think there's a lot to learn from your experience. And Tarin, if I could ask you, I feel like we're living in this sort of really in between time, right? So psilocybin is still a Schedule I drug, yet Oregon and Colorado have laws around it. Oakland, just across the bay from me, has decriminalization laws. That's sort of where a lot of this got started, and also in Colorado. And it kind of reminds me of like cannabis maybe 15 years ago, where you'd say, I thought cannabis was legal, but it's still a Schedule I drug, but yet there's a store down the street that sells it. And I hear from people in the psychedelic space that it's almost like they've sort of forgotten that there's risk, legal risk. I mean, be clear, I'm talking about legal risk here. Because there, in some ways, there's this appearance that it's everywhere, and is it still illegal? And I think Jessica's a good example of, you don't want to find that out the hard way, but yeah. And then there's this murkiness between like state laws and federal laws, and this always takes me back to high school civics, like the supremacy clause of the Constitution and all those things. And, when you started using legal words, I was thinking this is probably what my family thinks when I start using nursing words. Like, what does that mean? He was febrile, like, you mean a fever, right? So if you could break it down for us non-lawyers, to really understand, like, what is the landscape here? When people say, oh, it's legal, it's decriminalized, people use those two terms interchangeably, and I know they don't mean the same thing, but can you keep this just like we're non-lawyer, smart 12-year-olds? That's my target audience for you. Talk to me like a smart 12-year-old who's not.
If you've got 5 hours, I could go through it all with you.
You're not going to charge me lawyers' rates for that, are you?
No, I don't. In fact, I right now, I've spent, and Jessica's never paid me $1. All the work I've done in her case, I told her it was never going to be a charge. I'm a one-man public defender office is how I feel right now. I've got other cases I work on, and I don't feel that, I've been blessed in some ways. I'm not independently wealthy, but we get by, and we're dedicated to this work. And with my wife's support, she allows me to do this. It's very troubling. I mean, you unloaded a lot there. And it's going to be hard for me to even quite address all these issues. There is a bubble. I tell you, I go back. I don't know if the movie Poltergeist. I think it was 1983.
Yeah.
And in that movie, the parents smoke pot, and it's
Right.
like, oh my gosh! I mean, it's basically, and this is. I had this problem 20 years ago with marijuana in a small town in Ohio. People were getting busted for marijuana. You sell a joint of marijuana, and it's a felony.
Right.
It's trafficking, and it blew people's minds. Like it was a friend of mine, and now I'm hitting it again with the psychedelics, like you said. I've been to MAPS. I've been going to MAPS since 2011, and you go to MAPS, and it's a different world. My gosh, in Denver last year, I mean, or in 23, it's a different planet in comparison. And people forget, people don't understand. And it's really frustrating is the fact that growing the mushrooms, which people think to be safer and less expensive, perhaps, if you're successful, is a much more serious felony. It's manufacturing a Schedule I substance. You're much safer, really, technically, buying it or possessing it can be much less. It's the manufacturing which becomes a heightened problem. I know people with churches that were encouraging their members to grow their own, and I warned them. I said that can be very dangerous, and it's very confusing right now. I know that there are websites that are claiming to be religiously exempted, and you can buy mushrooms and have it shipped to you. And so where's the law on this? Then there's been an ambiguity or absence by the government in terms of enforcement. I was out in Denver when they first passed the decrim law, Kevin Matthews and Mike Duffy, and I met with them shortly after it was passed. They're like, what's happening here? And and the supposedly at that point, two things were interesting. One, the feds were backing off, but there was one guy who just kept poking the bear, and the feds took him down. You can't. He was just being flagrant about it, and they had enough. It's like. So it's not legal under federal law. But it was also part of the decrim movement that they were talking about. They were successful in arguing along the lines of the marijuana decrim, which was the idea that our courts, our jails are full of marijuana convictions that aren't really harmful to anybody. Why don't we decriminalize it, give a ticket for it? And and that made sense for marijuana. I could not understand how they thought that would work for mushrooms because we don't have prosecutions for mushrooms. We don't have lots of people sitting in jail, but they were successful in getting it passed through. And I didn't understand it. I told them, I said, if I go back to Ohio and to go to my local government and say, I want to decriminalize mushrooms, they're going to wonder what the hell I'm doing. And they're not going to look fine about it. But then I met, in Jessica's case, though, is where I really understood what decrim movement's about. I mean, here's a medical person background who's suffering from depression, anxiety to the point of suicide, who's trying to find something. And then the research is so promising, even got fast tracked by the FDA for pharmaceutical use at some point, hopefully. But why not be allowed to grow something in your backyard or in your basement, however you grow it, and try it? And so it kind of overlaps with the right to try. I'm not real familiar with the legal standing on that, but the right to try grew out of the idea of having access to a up and coming medication that could be used. And there's also so that is what I believe decrim is. I believe Jessica's story is the poster story for why we need decrim. People who are suffering should have the right to explore this option, which is not medically harmful. Psilocybin is less potent than water, I believe, in terms of toxicity levels. One of the least harmful compounds that there is, and why not be allowed to try it at least versus the consequences of otherwise? But we are living in a bubble in terms of like what's going on in California, Denver, Oregon versus the Midwest, and that's what can be very scary. And then you have a second bubble, which a lot of people aren't aware of it so much. At the federal level, there's a lot of discussion around this. Religious freedom, people probably have heard about, the religious exemption for churches falls under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act under federal law. In a case involved, it came out of a peyote issue, and then it was popularized, or the Supreme Court ruled an ayahuasca case to support it. But this is at the federal level. And while we're making progress in some of the legal procedures at a federal level, most of these cases are in state court. Jessica's case was in state court in front of a judge who's never, the judge and the prosecutor never heard of Burning Man, let alone gone to one. I mean, and you're trying to explain to them right from the their understanding of psychedelics is that the frying pan with two eggs in it, and you're just not able to move that. It's really different, and you've got to be careful. You got to be careful in understanding your local law as well as the federal law. You got to be careful in terms of possession versus manufacturing or other issues. And then it really is, I believe, but I also really believe strongly in the spiritual religious exemption. And that was the case that you, in my introduction, the Sarko-Gagarin, the tenant out of Massachusetts. He wanted to explore this. He wanted to find some way. He didn't want to go behind the department's back. How can I explore this legally without threatening to be in violation of my contract of employment? And we were able to get permission from his department for him to attend a psychedelic church. And I was hoping, and I'm still hoping, that his case will be used by nurses, by first responders, to get legal use to this. It's very sad, and Jessica's very troubled by it too, and the fact that you read about these studies, and these studies are now 4 or 5 years old, showing breakthrough treatment with use of psilocybin. And how do you get access to it? Well, there are churches that are claiming to have legal status to use this, and I encourage people to search them out and to pursue that in the meantime while we wait for the medical field to catch up. Or ultimately, I believe that the churches are the ones who should be holding this, because I believe it's a spiritual experience, a religious experience.
So if I could ask you a clarifying question, and forgive me if my dog wants to join in the conversation too, which he gets very excited about this topic. So somebody, I hear this a lot from people, and I don't want to ask you to give us legal advice, because I know how awkward it is sometimes when people ask me to give them nursing or medical advice. But, I think a lot of people are under this impression that, they can be a member of a psychedelic church. We have a number of them in the Bay Area. Possess what is a Schedule I substance, and if they were pulled over on a traffic stop or something that was discovered, that they would just kind of have a get out of jail free card. And what I think I'm hearing you saying is that you could still be arrested under state law for possession of an illegal substance. That's where it gets a little murky to me.
It's very murky. So I'm working on 2 other cases, one involving a man and a woman fiance who grew mushrooms here in Ohio under a church. And what I discovered in Ohio is that growing mushrooms in Ohio in a bulk amount is mandatory prison time. Wow. And basically in these local cases, they stack the deck like they did with Jessica. If you want to fight this, you're going to fight it facing 30 years, or we'll give you this. So I believe Jessica, we could have made an argument for spiritual religious use based upon her experience, but we couldn't fight it when they're giving us 90 days house arrest and a 1.5 year probation versus 30 years in prison. And these other cases that I'm trying to argue spiritual religious use, I'm fighting that, just the enormous leverage that they have in terms of threatening us. Then you're having the problem that in Ohio, we don't have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was a huge bonus under federal law. We have a constitution that supposedly includes that right or more, but it's never been established. So for me to go into court on this case, I would have to establish the law, then apply the law in front of a prosecutor and even in front of a prosecutor and a judge, and even their own lawyer who doesn't know anything about this stuff. And so it's ambiguous.
And I think what I'm hearing in there too is that it's a good reminder that while you may be sort of vindicated at the end of the day, as you largely were, Jessica, that there can be an incredibly odious process between that day of sort of vindication and when this all starts, and that you might be looking at all sorts of massive headaches like what you're still dealing with, even though you were pretty much cleared of the original charges. You're still being treated by the Arkansas Board of Registered Nursing as though you have a drug problem, so the two things don't always connect is what I'm hearing, and that you can spend a lot of time trying to navigate these complexities that emerge out of these situations. And I think one of your colleagues at Decrim Nature Northwest Arkansas was making the point here in one of the comments that we've got celebrities that are going on Oprah and talking about their ayahuasca journeys or their microdosing or whatever, and it's understandable how people sort of forget that, like, oh, this isn't legal in a lot of situations, or maybe decriminalized, but as I'm often reminded by my decrim friends, decriminalization is not the same as legalization. Decriminalization just means we're not enforcing that law, but we haven't taken that law off the books, right? Do I have that right, Tarin? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and it's the law. The law is not. The law is established through litigation, through cases, and we just don't have it. We don't have it because of most of these things you have to settle out because you can't afford the risk of going to trials to establish precedent. Right. So we really don't know. And there's a big difference between having a card that says you're part of a church versus someone who's really spiritually practicing it in a real way. And there are a lot of bad case law involving marijuana where we had, young men driving around at 2 a.m. get pulled over and their car reeks of marijuana, and they say they're Rastafarian and they have religious freedom. And it's like, no, you don't. That doesn't apply to driving around at night. And so there's bad law in the history of this involving other things. And so it really becomes this question of how do we litigate it? How do we get these cases established? The right is there, but you have to get it enforced through the case law precedent. And that's what I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, that's for those of us outside of the legal world, I think it's a little bit of an abstraction that laws are somewhat iterative, that they're based on previous findings and court outcomes. I just want to remind people in the last few minutes that we have, if people do have questions for the two of you, that they can go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll try and put those forward in the time that we have left. Jessica, you looked like you're about to say something.
Oh, I didn't. I was just itching my face.
Oh, all good. All good. Yeah. So, we often sort of end up these interviews by asking people, to reflect on their lives and to go back to some younger point in their lives and think about, what advice would they give themselves if they could go back and do it again. And, this particular situation seems to call for a more specific kind of, going back and thinking of yourself before you discovered anything about psilocybin or microdosing or its antidepressant effects, and certainly before any of this legal stuff happened. I mean, is there anything you would do differently? Is there anything you'd tell yourself?
Well, I'd tell myself to not be so hard on my younger self. I would convince my younger self, to have self-love. I would really enforce that a lot, because when you feel self-love, you can get all the things done in your life that you need to get done,
Yeah, well, not only self-love, but just the amount of courage you've had to have to get through this situation. Not only, let alone the psilocybin and the legal stuff, just depression, and anxiety. For 20 years, that takes a kind of fortitude that, is hard to, it's hard to draw up every day, but yet you're here. So,
yeah.
Good on you for that.
It was one of the worst parts of the experience, I believe, for her, was the fact that she was suffering so much. She has legitimate depression, anxiety that is profound.
Yeah.
And she, untreatable through other means. And she found an answer. She found hope. And then the hope was taken from her. And then suddenly, not only is the hope taken from her, she's told that she's a criminal and she's doing bad things. And for even for a person with anxiety and depression to be suddenly thrown into that further burden. It was just, I mean, it's a lot of strength. It really, and it was hard. There's no doubt it was hard. And
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine what it must have been like to see yourself in the local newspaper.
It was terrible. My mom worked at the newspaper. She was a city editor for years and years at that newspaper, and I couldn't believe that they put that on the front page. You know, they knew who I was, and they knew I wasn't a bad person, and it was a great story for them to write about. And
they treated her like she was like she was running a meth lab. I mean, that's how she was treated.
Yeah. No, that is, and unfortunately, that, I guess it sells newspapers, right? It gets people's attention and it gives them something to talk about, and
it's more funding for your police department
there's that too. Yeah, for sure.
Ordeal has definitely given me a lot more strength and courage and a lot of meaning in my life now, and I'm just moving forward and doing the best I can, and I got a lot of goals I still need to accomplish, and I'm doing it.
Well, I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad that you're not locked up somewhere, and that you can spend your life doing these important things that you're doing now, and not dealing with the consequences of really kind of arcane drug laws. I mean, that's such a relief that you were able to get through that, and to not only get through it, but to be thriving on the other side. I mean, that's be one thing to just kind of get through this bedraggled and exhausted, but you seem not only had survived it, but come out the other side stronger and inspired, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it feels good, and it feels really good.
Yeah. And Tarin, I'll pitch the question to you a little bit differently. We obviously have people watching this who are interested in psychedelics, which is kind of obvious. Psychedelics in most cases are still illegal, at least under federal law, and at best decriminalized under state law. What are just sort of general principles that people should be thinking about as they're involved in this space as professionals, as just citizens as well, so as to not have to deal with a situation like Jessica had to deal with?
It's troubling. I mean, because you still have that disparity between reading about the work that's being done and trying to find access to it. There are, more and more accesses opening up in places like Denver and Colorado that are, fairly legal. There's also opportunities with the churches. There's a religious. It hasn't been really litigated yet, but I do believe that that's a safe route to pursue with appropriate, research and vetting of those locations. The drug laws are very troubling. One of the in Indiana, one of the issues we ran up against was the weight, and under the classification, psilocybin was being weighed the same as fentanyl, in terms of just what the legal amount, would bump it up into just trafficking problems. Growing it your own can be very dangerous that way. It's not the safest route because of the way the laws are with the difference between possession and manufacturing. But I would encourage them to reach out to find out a little bit more about it and try to find a safe avenue through either the religious exemption or through locations that are open to it.
Yeah, and I think you were telling me that the weight was not just the mushrooms themselves, but the substrate that they were being grown in, and the mycelia and all that. It was just whatever was in the bucket was sort of considered.
Yeah, we wanted to argue. I wanted to argue under the law. Psilocybin is what was the compound that's illegal, and the psilocybin content of a mushroom is very small.
Right.
But they're weighing the whole mushroom, and they're also weighing the substrate, and because we just had very aggressive laws against drug, that these things are disproportionately applied to psilocybin.
Right. Yeah, because about 1% to 2% of the mushroom weight is actually psilocybin, right? And the rest is
the wet mushrooms, they weigh more than the dried mushrooms, and I had mushrooms that were still wet and drying out, and they tallied up all that weight, and it was just there was no consistency with how they were trying to tally up the weight of mushrooms that I had. They were
So it
weighing
looks
the
like you had a
capsules.
lot
They weighed
more.
the capsules. They weighed the baggies. They didn't. I don't even think they weighed him right when they were charging me.
Wow. Yeah. So, there's a lot. It seems like we're getting close to the end of our time here, but really appreciate both of you coming on here and sharing, this really difficult story, but I think also really inspiring that through community and through a mutual aid that, you did not end up going to prison for something which you never should have. And that people can learn from this situation, that the risks are not zero, and there's a lot of nuance in this. It gets lost when it gets tied up in the criminal system, and we're living in a real transitional time right now where we're not quite there yet. The research is charging ahead, but drug laws are way behind, and I think we're all feeling the tension between those two things kind of pulling us in different directions. So really want to appreciate both of you for being here tonight, and those of you who are watching this live, and if you're watching this in the future, you can find this, and if you watch this tonight live and you want to share this with folks, please head over to our YouTube channel, which you'll be able to see right after this closes up here, and you can share it with anybody who you like through that platform. So thanks for both being here. Really appreciate it, and wish both of you and our audience a good night until next month.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for this opportunity, and thank you for your support earlier with Jessica's case. It was really helpful.
Thank you so much, and thanks for helping me talk through this. It's really hard to be on camera and talk. So
you did great. You did great. You're a pro already, so you've got this. All right, everyone, have a good night, and we'll see you next time.